Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whenever you're able to join this APA panel conversation. I'm absolutely delighted that this afternoon we are going to be discussing psychological similarities between primates, canines, and equines. This is a topic that's really close to my heart. I am passionate about canines, equines, and primates. So being able to discuss the psychology around those particular species is really exciting for me. I hope you're going to join us and get involved in the conversation. Bounce comments in. We will feed back to you as those comments come in once we put the recording out. So this isn't just a dead conversation. We want to keep this going. We want to get people to engage with the concept that psychology for these three groups is something we can all learn from. So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce my guests for this episode. And for tonight, or this afternoon, I'm joined by Michelle and Jessie. Michelle is a jack of all trades, as she would describe herself, someone who works with both equines and canines. Don't think she's actually got to chimpanzees yet, but give her enough time and the right paperwork and she'll probably have those in her space as well. And Jess is someone who comes to this arena not just as a professional practitioner, but also someone that has, as she corrected me earlier before we got started, with 25 years of lived experience working with equines. So first off, ladies, thank you very much for joining me and being part of the panel conversation. Michelle, first off, what would you say when we talk about the similarities between canines and equines, what would you say stands out off the bat first for you?
It's the micro signs that so many owners or carers are absolutely ignorant of. So, and I've seen it in humans too. So things like licking and chewing, and turning heads away. So if you've got a human that's delivering a presentation, you'll see them lick and chew. One that I talk about a lot with my clients is Amy Cuddy, when she does her fake it till you make it power pose talk. And once you've seen it once and you've absorbed the information, then watch it again and watch how many times she licks and chews as she's trying to cover her nerves. But that also happens with the horses and the dogs, especially when they're feeling a little bit anxious. Mm-hmm. But there's signs before that. So there's the triangulation of the eye, the wrinkle of the lips. And with the dogs, they turn their head away, they lick and chew. So, yeah, I'm just going to lump the humans in with the primates because they do the same thing too. Yeah. And most owners and carers are absolutely oblivious to it.
Yeah, and you're right. Those humans are primates. Let's not cut the mustard. David Attenborough would tell us exactly the same. Humans are just a sub-branch of primates, and those micro signals are communication, and that again is something that I think we will be touching on as we go through the conversation. Jessie, what stands out for you as similarities?
I think very similar to what Michelle has said, people missing and generally being often completely all at sea with being able to interpret their horse or their dog's behaviour correctly, particularly with regards to emotions and stress. And I think for horses, what stands out most definitely for me, and I think dogs is improving just because the dog world ultimately I think moves faster than the equine world, is people's inability to actually acknowledge that horses can experience stress or emotions at all. It's happening, but it will be called something else. They'll be labelled as being, can I swear?
Go for it.
They'll label their horse as being an arsehole or a little shit, or you know, rather than actually acknowledging that the horses, you know, those behaviours are expressions of discomfort or stress or worry. That's the standout for me, I think.
So for both of you, and I'll come to kind of primate in a moment, but for both of you, there is that complete disconnect in a large portion of the human reading of a canine or an equine behavior, and missing the early trigger warnings that the animal will always give. And humans do the same. I think all of us have at some point in this presentation so far, and if everybody plays it back, we've all licked, we've all chewed. And it's something that is innate in all of us as mammals. And we can see it in the primate world as well, from orangutans right the way through to leaf monkeys and Diana monkeys. They all do the same early warning. It's about, for me, as a practitioner, in the sense of understanding those triggers, understanding those behaviors, is that you have to notice the first set of 3 or 4 triggers that are coming in order to understand what the behavior is that is the big presentation. Because for many of us who don't understand the psychology, we don't see those. We see the big presentation. We see the dog bite. We see the horse kick. We see the silverback banging his chest. We don't see the nuances that come. And when we look at primates and humans, as Michelle rightly pointed out, we're there too. Club us all together. There is so many micro triggers, micro displays, whether it's the eye flick, whether it's a hand gesture, whether it is a turning of a shoulder. And we can see the shoulder switch in chimpanzees do this a huge amount. It's, I don't want you to groom me, so I'm going to drop the shoulder. I'm going to open up the shoulder if I do want you to groom me. And it's those things that researchers look at and they go, well, that's that communication. But if the researcher isn't looking at the micro before that, then they're making an assumption and then they're acting on that assumption. And this is where I think a lot of the challenges, and something that Jess just said really rings true on this, we're making assumptions. And the canine world is moving faster than the equine world, and the primate world is moving faster than the both put together. But the primate world appears to be moving faster because there are more subspecies in there and there is more research being done with that mindset in play. Do you think that the speed at which those sectors are moving is in relation more to the understanding of the individuals, the human individuals within it? Or do you think it's simply about the new understanding that's coming through? What do you think is driving that, the speed of that change? What do you think, Michelle?
For me, I think it's the new understanding that's coming through. I think that, especially at the grassroots level, not necessarily at the international high-end competitor level, but at the grassroots level, what I'm seeing is there's people who've had horses their whole life. They're seeing the new research coming through. They're seeing there's softer ways of doing things and understanding their horses. And so they are changing. But you've still got an element of the industry that is focused on competing and, the trophies that they're winning, the riding clubs and all the rest of it. And for them it's more about the competition. The horse has got a job to do, or at least this is what I'm witnessing, and there's a lot less interaction with the horse, where the horse has freedom to choose what they do, when they do it. You know, if I take my own horses, I don't compete anymore. I lost interest in it many years ago, but they consent to being ridden. I get the bridle out, and if they don't want to know, that, you know, they will walk away, and they're free to do that. So around me in particular, and the circle that I mix in, there's more and more people giving their horses choices. And I'm also a dog walker, and there's more and more dog owners now looking into enrichment and understanding that dog walking is about the sniffing, because sniffing for dogs is like Facebooking is for us.
Yeah.
So, you know, there is more understanding coming through, and then obviously you've got those people who are eager to learn, like myself and Jessie, and we're taking it to the next level that we can within the limits of our knowledge, and in my case, not owning my land.
Yeah. Jessie, do you think that as that new knowledge is coming through, and I know you're working as part of that feed of new knowledge, do you think that there is an acceptance to new knowledge, or do you think there is still a lot of resistance to the softer way of thinking, to kind of coin the phrase that Michelle just used?
I think it depends. I think there are small pockets of forward-thinking people, but also what I've seen in the dog industry very recently, and I say recently meaning literally the last 2 or 3 months, maybe less. There's this movement has sprouted called Beyond the Operant, spearheaded by a wonderful gentleman called Andrew Hale, and also Kathy Murphy, who is a canine neuroscientist, and Kim Brophy, who is a dog ethologist, to look at what else there is, you know, beyond learning theory, and what other modalities and sectors can we draw knowledge from to better understand dogs and also horses. I'm also very privileged to work for a very forward-thinking organisation where we look at supporting people in understanding equine-human interaction, and my colleague does a lot of really great research there. But people's knowledge of horse behaviour is literally entrenched in millennia of ways of interacting and seeing and perceiving horses. And I think that it just is slow. There's a very slow drip effect, and people also, perhaps, I don't believe people are intentionally mistreating their horses or their dogs or intentionally getting it wrong. I think it's just the knowledge isn't always as accessible as it could be, and B, they just are finding it incredibly uncomfortable due to the cognitive dissonance to actually take in the new information that's being presented. Sorry, that may have made no sense.
No, it made perfect sense, and I'm really delighted that we are just about to be joined by Marlene.
Yay!
And
Hi.
Hi, Marlene.
Hi.
Hi. Sorry, I just want to get my camera sorted. Today is one of those days.
We're already into record, so we're gonna. There we go. Look, see, Marlene. Very, very briefly, please just introduce yourself to the audience, and we'll bring you up to speed with where we're at.
Okay, I'm a specialized equine psychotherapist. I trained advanced level with IGALA, and also did the introductory course of trauma-focused lifemanship. I've also done advanced training in animal-assisted therapy and activities, and then added to that is my normal counseling job that I do, and which my speciality is trauma and trauma-related clients, you can say.
Yeah. So.
And I'm from South Africa.
No. I think you were hiding that bit very well. It's great to have you as part of the panel, and I really do appreciate you having the time to spare for us this evening. We've kind of touched on some of the similarities around the primate, canine and equine arena, and some of those triggers with more focus really on the interaction with humans and their animal, and the things that we miss as humans when we're looking and interacting with equines and canines, those micro triggers that we don't tend to notice, but we notice the big displays of stress, of trauma, etc. Do you think that, from your experience, when we're working with equines, predominantly as that's your field, that we as humans, we're still putting our desire for control over the animal first? There we go. Can you hear us, Marlene?
Yes, I can. Just repeat your question. I thought it was a general question, so I was like,
do you, from your experience, do you think that in general equine interaction with humans, there is still a human control first over the animal rather than the animal partnership with the human?
no. I think when you work with animals or with equines, the therapist should be very, very mindful of not being it about you as a therapist. It is about the communication between the client and the animal, or the equine in our situation. So there's a conduit happening there. You actually are just sort of part of the conduit, and the discussion and the interaction and whatever happens between the equine and the human, the client, is something very special. And that is, I think, what for me is very important, is that they are not a tool per se that we use. They we like to call them like a passive, if you want to say passive. I don't think they're passive, but let's, for lack of a better word, say they are a passive therapist in the team. So they don't heal you, they interact with you. Nobody can heal you. You need to heal. That journey is for yourself.
Yeah.
They kind of assist in the process, as a therapist would assist in the process.
Yeah. So in the, take it outside of that therapeutic working, where an owner, and this isn't just equines, this is canines as well. There aren't that many owners of primates, so we'll leave that to one side for a second. But the general desire to control causes problems in that relationship with the animal.
I think it depends on what do you mean with control. What does control look like for you? I mean, to have a 500 kilo horse that you, or 700 kilogram horse that you allow to just walk over you, no mare and would allow that in a herd. No stallion would allow that. There is certain respectfulness, and this is my bubble. And if you look at the horses, they actually kind of ask permission to come into your bubble. They don't just walk over everybody in the herd and be pushy without repercussions. So if that is what you mean with control, then I think you need to, it's not a dominance, and it's not a, it's a partnership, is that I'm respectful and you're respectful in the process. So it depends on what control looks like for you.
And I think from the conversation with Jess and Michelle, what we were kind of looking at is that for the vast majority of owners in general, there is still a sense that they're not able and that's through no fault of their own. This is not a let's let's pick on people that don't know, but there is a missing of those micro communication channels. And when we don't read those channels because our focus is on what we want the animal to do, then we can cause ourselves and the animal more stress than we need to. But Jess, do you think that as the knowledge is changing and with information that is more psychologically focused, people are getting better at spotting those micro triggers?
I think some people are. And also just to sort of pick up on Marlene's sort of equine assisted kind of discussion, I really kind of echo what she says, that there also needs to be, I think, in this field, because I work for MEMA Centre and we are a non-model based, we are not model based, but we do provide education in equine assisted therapies and learning based on the research that is out there on equine human interaction, that there needs to be an awareness of how the client perceives how the therapist is interacting with the horse and what that looks like. And in some sectors of the industry, that sometimes gets overlooked. So it's really important that the quality of those interactions, from as much as we can know about the equine's perspective, is appreciated in terms of how that also looks for the client, in order for them to gain the most benefit from their experience.
It's almost like a pre-briefing needs to happen so that the human understands what they're going to witness. You're shaking your head there.
I don't think in a therapeutic inset, because if you work in a therapeutic setup, you're not doing horsemanship. If you do horsemanship where you teach and educate, then you tell them, don't, careful, do. In therapeutic setup, the horse is free to move, to join or to leave. And that's one of the reasons we work in a team of two, so that you have your equine specialist that is aware of the horse's need, and you have your therapist that's aware of the client's need. So you will intervene in a situation where danger is, but I have, in the 20 years that I've worked with it, never had an incident where I had to intervene because of a danger, that the horse is becoming a danger to the person. Yeah. Oh, they stepped on some people's toes, but they actually needed at that point in time. And we didn't have to preach. The horse sorted the problem out for us. But if you start telling a client, don't walk behind a horse, it's going to kick you, don't do this, don't do that, you rise the anxiety level sky high and you lose the whole therapeutic insight.
Jess, correct me if I'm wrong, but and Michelle, I'll bring you in just a second. What ultimately is, it's that pre-engagement in that relationship, almost letting the client know what to expect before going into the arena with the animal, because most owners have no concept of how that's going to look. And
well, that is already a valuable tool for the therapist to assess. Does this person have a sense of awareness of danger? Is this person looking at body language? Are they interpreting body language? Are they aware of those around them, of their environment, of the needs of others? So everything that happens there is a load full of information that it gives you.
Yeah.
So our briefings are very short.
I think Jess was alluding to. Michelle, I've watched your two goes, and I think it's absolutely phenomenal the way that they play, the way that they interact with you and your other half, and there is very much a team partnership, it is that communication is in play. That doesn't happen overnight, does it?
Moo were, so my two girls, there's Moo, who I've had for 13 years. She was bought as a problem horse. And back then I was an uber confident rider, would ride at anything. And she came to me, she would bolt, she would rear, she would buck. But she'd also have some really placid days where nothing would go wrong. And I could ride her with no tack on at all. So I wasn't prepared to give up on her for all the behaviours. At that time, and I'm going back 10 to 13 years, I was told to use whips, spurs, flash or grackle nose bands, which tie the mouth shut. And I was told to use martingales, which tie the head down. And I actually stopped having riding lessons because I wanted to understand why the behaviour was happening and not use a gadget to fix it. And at the point that I came into equine behaviour and clicker training, Moo would actually go and stand in the field and she wouldn't come to me, not even for a bucket of food. Within one session of clicker training, she started to take interest in me again. And then from that point, I literally went and learned about equine behaviour, equine ethology, learning theory, and I just wanted to be the best human that I could be for those horses. I had an accident in 2014 on a different horse, which eventually got rehomed because I never got my confidence back to get on her, and she just wasn't the right horse for me. But Moo, because of her previous behaviour, wasn't that horse you get your confidence back on. And 3 years ago, I was given Echo, my fell pony, and she's just brought me ultimate joy. But what was interesting, they're both the same age. They've had a very different life. Moo's behaviour turned out to be pain related. So she had, she's had literally from the age of 13 through to 19, hardly any ridden work. Whereas Echo has had a showing career. She's been a prolific winner. She's bred foals. She's been to Horse of the Year show. And when she arrived, they were both exactly the same age. And she looked about 35 at the side of Moo, who looked about 12. And I was like, wow, this is just showing me how stressful the life is for those horses that are competing. And then I thought, you know, imagine what it's like for those that are eventing and traveling around the world. And she didn't know how to make choices. And it took 18 months, 2 years before she realized she was allowed to make a choice. And I say I've got another monster because she's very opinionated, but I would rather have that conversation and listen to what they're saying to me, because when I get the tack out now, they can't wait to put their nose in the bridle, and we take treats out with us. We let them eat when they're hacking. And they want to do the jobs that I want to do with them. But I also know there's some days where I walk into the field, they don't want to interact with me. I'm okay with that. I don't take it personally because it's absolutely not personal.
Yeah.
You know, when I used to work in the office, there were days when I didn't want to talk to people, but I had to. So
and
it's
this
the same
is
for the horses.
Yeah, and this is that acceptance. It's the acknowledgement, but also the apology that a human can take into that interaction with an animal. And I was told about the AAA a long time ago. If you go into a relationship with an animal, you better be ready to bring the AAA. You have to acknowledge, you have to accept, and you have to be ready to apologize. And if you're not prepared to do that with every single interaction, that animal is going to build a resilience to you that you will never be able to get past. And the example that I'll give is in K9's. I am currently working with Charlie, who is a fabulous collie who had a rough start. He had a very unknown point of origin, but a clear presentation of trauma. And when I received Charlie, he was 2.5 years old. He was petrified of the sound of the sea. I currently live 200 yards away from the sea. He could hear the sea constantly, absolutely petrified. He did not understand K9 language in any way, shape or form. It was completely alien to him. Within a week, he was being assessed by the vet as a red flag and an animal that was not going to be able to engage. Within 8 weeks, the vet did not recognize the personality of the dog. And that's simply because every interaction that I went into with him over that period of time, I was taking that AAA every single time. And I was never, ever waiting for him to give me the AAA. I was never waiting for him to accept what I wanted or to acknowledge what I wanted. I wanted, as Michelle said, it's waiting for them to tell you, and you've got to listen.
Yeah.
And you know, when we see working dogs, and you know, whether that is in agriculture, whether that is in security, whether that is in the military, the same principle applies of using that AAA. And handlers have been doing this for years. And as Jess said, the canine world moves faster than the equine world in some cases. But do you think that the human therapist has got benefits from learning from the equine and the canine world? And if so, what do you think those benefits, kind of, you know, top 3 benefits that human therapists can gauge from the equine and canine world? I'm going to go first. Jessie, what do you think?
I'm not a therapist, so I feel like I can't really answer that sort of for them. But I do think there are vast amounts of learning that feel like missed opportunities to me between the sectors. That there are, I mean, I'm very, very privileged in that, you know, in my other job at MEMA Centre, I get to interact with sort of therapists all the time. So there is that sort of backwards and forwards exchange of what both sectors can learn from each other. I also think in my own interactions with services as a client, as a patient, that there's a great deal of learning that could come from the animal behaviour sector as well, in terms of attention to the environment, attention to the quality of the interaction, all of the things that sometimes get missed when things are shoehorned into a, particularly on the NHS where things are kind of so brief. So yes, I do think there is sort of learning across both ways, but I don't want to speak for therapists.
No, that's fine. And it's I think we've actually touched on some of what they can gain through what we know about the animal interaction process. But Marlene, you're working with that equine assisted therapy. What do you think are the biggest factors that the human professional can gain from the equine and canine understanding?
That the therapist can actually keep quiet and there's still some work happening. We tend to want to talk too much, and we tend to want to tell people what to do. And I think that's one of the unlearning things that you have to do when you work in a therapeutic setup, is to allow the horses and the clients to interact and to deal with whatever that is put on the table. And you don't have to know exactly what, and you don't have to know, in my opinion, how to exactly explain how that happened. You know, can you give a scientific clarification because this happened and that happened? It's nice to know these things, but I think it's important to sometimes just be and to just allow that happening. And I said, like I said to you the other day, for me, there's almost a spiritual dimension to this, that things happen in a realm that maybe we should not try and explain. But on the practical side, I think it's important for therapists to actually be able to stand back and to allow the process to happen without being the interference in the process because of your agenda, you know, or what you think the client's agenda is.
Michelle, you've seen that interaction over and over and over. And you've also seen how some human owners, handlers interact in a negative way. What do you think, if you could go, here are the things that I've learned, these are the top 3 things that I've learned that's made my life easier with my equines and the canines that I work with, what would those top 3 things be, do you think?
Top 3 things. Understanding the comfort zone and the stretch zone or change zone, depending on how you want to term it, through to the panic zone. And within that, understanding how anxiety works within those zones. Understanding what I call the micro signs, some people call them calming signals, because you can deal with a situation at the point that it's the blink of an eye, before it even gets anywhere near a growl or a kick or a bolt or a reel, whatever. And then the third thing for me is trigger stacking. So with the horses and the dogs, we've got, when I'm dog walking and when I'm riding the horses, because of the area I live in, I have to ride through housing estates. I have to walk dogs through housing estates. There's all sorts of things I'm going to encounter. So I have to understand at what point we've trigger stacked so far that moo is going to blow or the dogs are going to react. The best thing to do in that situation, you get yourself out of the situation. You know, and I know when I've been out riding and we've seen a bike, then a pushchair, then a dog, and then there's kids playing on the swings in the park, and then there's someone behind the hedge. I get off at that point because I know those 5 things are enough that it's going to trigger me to want to bolt for home. But because I've been dealing with that in a way that gives her safety and empowerment to deal with the situation, they happen a lot less frequently. And it's the same with the dogs. You get them out of the situation. There's someone local to me that I've seen when I'm out riding, and his dog reacts to lots of stuff, but he stays in the situation. And I think he thinks he's desensitizing the dog, but he's not. He's making it worse.
He's sensitizing.
Yeah, and so I did tell him the other day to just get the dog out of the situation because it would benefit the dog. And this is what humans need to learn to do, because so often, especially in a work environment, we're told to push on, to get that target, to keep going. But actually in the animal world, don't keep going. Stop, take a step back and revisit it. And if I go back to the work with the horses and the clients, I've done some leadership, supported leadership coaches, and I've gone in as the equine handler for the day. And I've seen really phenomenal work go on where people learn about their body language, their emotional state, what they're projecting onto other people. The horses can teach people in one day what you would learn take 2 years in the classroom to learn. And that's the amazing power. But every human that has an animal could learn all of this if they just opened their mind. You know.
One of the things that has struck me, and I suspected, but having spoken to the 3 of you over the last, I think, Michelle, you and I have been speaking for the best part of sort of 18 months or so, and I've learned a huge amount from you, and I want to acknowledge that, and I want to thank you for that learning. But one of the things that really does strike me is that I've been saying for the last 20 years in primate psychology, including human, there is a thing called a tub rating. It's how we measure the information that we receive, whether that's verbal, non-verbal. That tub rating is made up of, do we trust it? Do we understand it? Do we believe it? And our equine and canine counterparts are doing exactly the same thing in the interaction that they have from us. Do they trust us? Do they understand what we want? And do they believe that we know what we're doing? Because if that rating for them is low, then they will never, ever engage with the maximum potential. But at the same time, the human is receiving information from their animal that they are measuring in exactly the same way. Do they trust that animal? Do they understand what the animal is saying to them? And do they believe that that animal is going to be okay with them? And if that rating is low and the animal's rating is low, that interaction is going to be a catastrophe in any way, shape or form. And it's just struck me how potent understanding the tub rating in our animal interactions is, just as it is in understanding our communication to the animal in exactly the same way. And what are your thoughts on this crazy harebrained scheme of understanding tub rating in relation to this arena? What do you think?
I must say, I think working with animals, it's exceptionally important that you understand a couple of things. You must understand stress and how stress works in the human and in the animal. You need to understand in the canine section, the different breeds were bred for different reasons, predispositions, different things are going to trigger them. And where play goes into seeking behavior for a German Shepherd in a very quick time, it might take a lot longer for a Dalmatian to go from play to seeking behavior. That circuitry switch happens a lot slower, maybe in that specific thing. So it is your responsibility as a handler or as the human to make sure you understand it. And if you can't read those signals, that's why we have two people in the equine field. The equine specialist's work is to read the signals of the horses. It's not your job to look after the client. That's the mental health person's job. So that, and you need to be able to interpret those signals and not overreact and set the circuitry off. You need to be able to, what we call in human stuff, is to help them self-regulate, so that they can feel safe, so that they can get out of being panicked and stressed and actually think what is happening. And if you manage that, and it's exactly the same way a human works, if you manage that whole stress system in the human and you manage it in the horse or in the canine, then you're listening and you're observing and you're looking at fine body language stuff. And that's why when you know your horse, you know 4 items is good. Number 5 is a disaster. My horse might be 6 items and number 7 is a disaster, or number 1 is the disaster. I need to get off at that point in time. So I think it's and I agree with you, it's very important for animals to understand what is expected of them. Just like normal children, if you don't give them boundaries, you don't give them safety. So where do they stop? Where can they go? When can they go? How far can they go? And if you can't put that in place, and I don't mean boundaries by hitting and punishing, I mean, this is the boundary. In here, you can play. If you overstep, we're going to have a discussion about it. If you want to push it, we're also going to have a discussion about it, because that's what the alpha or the leading mare or the herd leader or whatever you want to call them, that's what happens in nature, because nature functions in synchronicity. I'm an Afrikaans speaking person, okay, so these are big words. Synchronicity and order. You go and look at a herd, there's order. You go and look at a pack of hot dogs, there's an order there. And we need to respect it.
It falls into place, doesn't it? And we come back to exactly where we started. And Michelle's point about how often we miss those micro triggers, those micro communicators, that if we understand those, we can cut off an awful lot of the trauma triggers. We can head off a lot of the anxiety. And that's the same for any therapist working in the room with a human client, is spotting that leaking of body language, spotting those key factors. Just before we close, I'd like to kind of just give a quick run round in the room on where you would like to see the relationship between the human therapist and the animal behavioral arena. Where would you like that to get to? Michelle, where would you like to see that relationship go?
In the setups that I've worked in, I'd like to see the horses have a lot more choice than they sometimes get. I mean, in a perfect world, if I was doing the equine assisted work in my wave a magic wand world, it would be on the Cumbrian fells and with wild fell ponies, because then you could really see the truth of how the herd interact. And teams, you know, and I'm talking about leadership coaching, the teams could learn so much from watching a herd interact. But that said, you can do it with a herd of cows, because I often watch the herd of cows in the
Llamas.
field. The family setup is phenomenal, you know, and mum and dad are really protective and nurturing. And I often just watch the cows and think, gosh, you could do this work with the cows as well.
Absolutely.
And possibly less hands-on work with the animals.
Mm-hmm. Jessie, where would you like to see that relationship go?
I'm going to echo Michelle first off, but also I think as an industry we need to be, you know, both the as someone who works in both the equine behaviour and the equine assisted therapy world, we need to be supporting each other, and we need to be supporting caregivers also to really fully understand their horse or their dog, understand how they choose to interact, their dog specifically or their horse, understand what their needs are in these interactions, learn as ourselves what that means to show up in a way that is safe, to allow the animal to feel safe and manage the environment and manage stress and build on those understandings. And also, I totally agree about how helpful observations of feral herds can be, as opposed to domestic horses who are actually somewhat distorted by that process. So I'm going to echo Michelle really there.
Right. Thank you. Marlene, last word to you. Where would you like to see it go?
I think I had the privilege of doing what these two ladies wish they could do, is working with wild horses and working with them in their natural environment. And it is fascinating. And I mean, we actually accidentally had llamas once as well, which was not sort of not kind of, you know, organized. They just kind of happened. Mm-hmm. So yes, it is. I think for me, it would be to allow the two worlds to meet each other, wherever that should be at that point in time. Because the moment we make a theory out of something and we make a dogma out of something, we kind of start to control when should what happen. And I think that interferes very often with the process. So within the field of within the boundaries of safety for okay, and that's a whole discussion on what is safety perceived as, but within fair safety, emotional, psychological and physical safety for both parties, I would just like the process to happen and the human to trust the animal in the process instead of wanting to direct them in the process.
Yeah. Ladies, thank you so much for your time this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I keep learning from all three of you whenever we speak, and that is an absolute delight for me. Just to touch on how primate psychology, and I'm going to talk about leaf monkeys for a second. I gave a presentation in Borneo at a jungle feeding station. Now, these are feeding stations that are open to the natural environment. They are not contained. They are there to provide support in an area that food would not be readily available. Okay, so I'm sat on the floor talking to a group of human rangers about psychological impacts and how they interact with guests and tourists and everything else. And a troop of leaf monkeys arrived at the feed station. And the alpha decided that whatever was going on in this circle on the ground, they needed to be in. And there was a direct challenge because I was holding court as he saw it. He sat in the middle of the circle, lifted his tail up and put it across my leg. Now, I'm petrified. I mean, this thing is like big. It's massive thing, right? And I've got his tail laying across my leg. And one of the rangers says, do not move, do not touch it, but do not stop talking. That challenge was to see whether or not I was going to give way and let him take the circle, or whether I was just going to carry on and ignore him. So I did my level best with a change in voice, I'm pretty sure.
I'll get two pictures up.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So I'm talking about psychology of primates and this, that, then. And yeah, really? You think you know about the psychology of primates? I can tell you, I've walked away from amazing sessions, but that was a session and a half where everything that I was saying about it's not a threatening threat. And this is what happens with canines. They can threaten without threatening. They are communicating. They are letting you know that this is where things sit. You need to trust that I'm not going to rip your face off. You need to understand that I'm not going to rip your face off. And you need to believe that if I wanted to, I could.
Yes.
That tub rating discussion in that moment had live interaction that was never, ever a part of the presentation. But it was
script.
Perfectly. And everyone could see how it played out. Because while he was threatening me, or he was challenging me, he was also waiting to see whether he could trust me not to pick its tail up. Did I understand that what was happening was okay? And did I believe that the situation was okay? So it's a two-way communication. And all the way through this discussion, all of you have demonstrated perfectly how important it is when we interact with any animal. There is two-way communication. And that in animals is not so much about listening as it is watching. So for everyone out there, thank you for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. I hope you've gained as much as I have. And if there is any questions, anything else, by all means, put them into the comments. We will disperse them and get those answers for you. For now, ladies, thank you very much for your time. And to everyone else, take care, and we'll see you again in another episode very soon. Bye bye for now.